when I was forward deployed in the Arabian Gulf in 2011, unfortunately, I got hurt and I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I was on the ship, and all of a sudden, I'd gotten off a 6 hour watch. Felt great because I was done with watch for the day, and I was turning over our duty section, so felt good about that. Cooled off a little bit, and then went down the ladder well in the mine sweep, down to the corpsman's sort of little closet that he worked in. He was just a E6, and he was the only corpsman we had on the boat. But he was a friend of mine, and so we would have breakfast every morning. And so I went down, and I guess from what I understand, I was standing in the room, and all of a sudden just went blank and passed out and was unconscious. And they ended up trying to have me regain consciousness, but were unsuccessful.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations. Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Vic Martin, who is a medically retired Navy mineman, a dedicated advocate, educator, and keynote speaker on veteran issues, particularly focusing on the transition from active duty to civilian life and mental health challenges. His personal experiences enable him to provide genuine genius too, peer-to-peer mentorship. Mr. Martin holds several leadership roles, including Commander of American Legion Post 275, Second Vice Commander at American Legion District 22, Second Vice President of the San Diego Veterans Coalition, and advisor on various councils and boards. He was recognized as a 2023 Veteran Vanguard Star Veteran of the Year and has spoken extensively about mental health support. And Vic, I just want to say on a more personal note, Vic came out in September for the event that we had in Oak Harbor, Washington, talking about the CMVR model and veterans reintegration. And man, it's just been such an incredible journey from meeting you, Vic, to where we are now. And we just spent probably 20, 30 minutes catching up before we even started recording. And man, there's so much more to talk about. So I am so appreciative and grateful that you took the time to be on the show today.
Oh, I cannot tell you how honored I am to be here, Rachel, and thank you. And it was great catching up. So awesome to see and hear about what you're doing in Oak Harbor and
Thank
in
you.
the surrounding area.
Thank you. And so if there's one word or a few words you could use to describe how you are feeling going into this episode today, how would you describe that?
Excited.
I love that. Awesome. Well, I'm going to pass it off to you then to share your story with the listeners.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rachel. And thank you for all being here. So my name is Vic Martin, as Rachel just shared, and I served in the Navy as a mineman. A lot of folks have never met a mineman, so we're the smallest rate in the Navy. We essentially work with underwater explosives in every capacity, from building to finding to sweeping to everything that you could imagine with underwater explosives. We do it, and so it was a great experience for me, because every day was a different experience. Every day I was doing something different. I got to work with Mark 6 sea lions for about 18 months, and that was one of the most just rewarding experiences that I've ever had. Working with sea lions is something kind of like working with dogs, except a lot stinkier and a lot smellier. So but it was great. It was one of those times in my life where every day I sort of looked around and said, am I really getting to do this, or am I really, is this really my life right now? And it was just awesome, standing underneath helicopters doing vert reps, and then working in a shop, in a mine shop, where we worked on a lot of test equipment, a lot of kind of research that we were doing about mine sweeping, etc. It was great. I loved it, and I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, well, when I was forward deployed in the Arabian Gulf in 2011, unfortunately, I got hurt and I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I was on the ship and all of a sudden I'd gotten off a 6 hour watch. Felt great because I was done with watch for the day and I was turning over our duty section. So felt good about that. Was topside rover from balls to six, got off watch, went to CIC, our Combat Information Center on the ship, hung out, cooled down a little bit because in the Arabian Gulf, it's like 100 degrees at, 6 o'clock in the morning, cooled off a little bit, and then went down the ladder well in the mine sweep down to the corpsman's sort of little closet that he worked in. It was he was just a E6, and he was the only corpsman we had on the boat. But he was a friend of mine, and so we would have breakfast every morning. And so I went down and to meet him and HM1 Martinez. And I guess from what I understand, I was standing in the room, and all of a sudden just went blank and passed out into his trash can and was unconscious. And they ended up trying to have me regain consciousness, but were unsuccessful. And I was seizing, from what I understand, and you know everything that I think that comes along with that. And after about 15 minutes, from what I understand, the command master chief luckily advocated for me to get off the boat. We were pier side in Bahrain, and Bahrain didn't have any naval hospitals. We had a clinic, but we didn't have a hospital. And so I would have had to be taken to a hospital out in town. And the commanding officer at the time had concern about civil unrest and about us being in uniform while out in town. The command master chief finally persuaded him, and the CO granted us access to leave the ship. They took me, from what I understand, in a stretcher into a duty van and took me to the first hospital in Bahrain. And they denied my access and said that you couldn't have a service member in the hospital. And so they put me back into the duty van and drove me to the International Hospital of Bahrain, which is on the Saudi border. And they accepted me, luckily. And I was in intensive care for 3 days, and then in the hospital for another 10 before I could be medevaced out. And essentially, what had happened was I had had some sort of cardiac episode due to what they considered environmental conditions. And when I was unconscious, my heart was not beating fast enough to provide enough oxygen to my brain. And as a result, had suffered a brain injury. And so it wasn't an impact or an explosion; it was just a lack of oxygen. And that was really difficult to sort of process. They were still trying to figure out everything while I was in the hospital in Bahrain. I remember coming to and sort of never really feeling that alone in my life. You're in a foreign hospital. They had put me on the watch bill, so somebody from the ship had come out to the hospital, which was like 45 minutes away from the pier, to stand watch, and they would rotate every 6 hours. And I remember just looking over and seeing, somebody that I knew at the door, which made me feel comfortable, but not being able to call my family, or not being able to have any communication with my kids, or not knowing if I was going to live, or, I mean, I was so out of it. I had a hard time even understanding what was going on at that time. And so I was medevaced eventually back to the States, to Balboa. And that's when they actually diagnosed me. The Navy diagnosed me, and they brought my wife in to the clinic on wet side or dry side at 32nd Street, and sat her down and basically said, your husband has, suffered a traumatic brain injury, something they call hypoxic, I believe it's called, and that they don't know how bad it's going to get. And at the time, I was having really, really bad difficulty with speaking. I had a terrible stutter as a result of the brain injury, and a lot of cognitive issues with keeping a train of thought, and also with memory. And so oftentimes I would forget, where I was or who I was with, and I would leave places without, like my wife, I would forget I was with her. And it was just challenging. I didn't even know who I really was. And the answer to my conditions, the Navy believed were medications. And so I was heavily medicated. Also being asked to go to quarters, asking, to kind of be limited duty at this command in on 32nd Street, which was a mine shop that we had there. And so I would go in and I would, stay the day, and most of my day was filled with medical appointments and so forth. But oftentimes, I wouldn't really understand what was even going on around me. I remember one incident where we were doing a dress blues inspection, and all of this command, which was made up of little tiny commands, all got into this big warehouse, and there must have been 500 or 600 of us, and we were all in dress blues and all in ranks. And I was standing in ranks, and there must have been about 600 of us in this warehouse. And looking across the room, in the middle of the room were all of the chiefs and officers and so forth getting ready to do the inspections. And on the other side, across from me, were another ranks of sailors in their dress blues with their unit. And I looked across and I saw this sailor looking at me and kind of giggling. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand why. But I just left my ranks and walked across between all of the chiefs and officers. And at the time, I was an E4 and E5, excuse me, and stood in up to this guy's face while he was in, standing at attention and trying to yell at him to fight me. It was such a out of character for me. It was so out of character. It was unbelievable. Here I am trying to fight this guy in the middle of a dress blues inspection with commanding officers, chiefs, senior chiefs, master chiefs, everyone standing around looking at me like, what in the world are you doing? But it was just sort of this example of where my mind was. I graduated from boot camp as an honor graduate. I made 5 ranks in 4 years. I mean, I did pretty damn good, and to then have my career sort of ending on that note was really scary. I was lucky to have a lot of chiefs who looked out for me and sort of, covered my trails, if you will, and just tried to explain to those around me what I was sort of struggling with. But it was really challenging. It was really challenging. It was becoming to the point where I wanted to fight every day. I didn't understand the anger I was feeling. And then my medical retirement happened, and they said, okay, you're all done. You don't have to come back to work on Monday. Here's your DD 214, and we'll see you later. That's it. And I went home, and at the time, well, I still have 3 children. They're not so much children anymore, but at the time, they were kids. And my wife, and in a house that we had just purchased before I went on deployment, was falling apart. And here I am in a home that I don't understand who I even am, let alone how to interact with my family. There was an incident where I was at Home Depot with my daughters, and they were probably about, I'd say, 13 and 9 at the time. And I had picked something up in the paint department and was looking at it. And the 1MC went off, and some lady was just yelling into the 1MC. I couldn't understand it. All of a sudden, the aisle got really filled full of people, and I sort of started to shake and sweat. And I ended up collapsing and basically having this minor seizure where I urinated in my pants and vomited, and they're trying to call 911, and I'm sort of coming to realizing that I just need to get out of there. And then I look up and I see my daughter's faces, them having to see what just happened to their dad. It forced me not to leave my house. It scared me so much that I started to isolate myself because I was afraid of what was going to happen when I was out in public. And at the time, I still was stuttering horribly. I still couldn't think straight, still very over medicated. having a difficulty with understanding that with what I believed was me being all by myself in the world and nobody being there to help me. I had no idea that there were resources or programs that existed to help me. I had no idea whatsoever. I was part of a case management program through the VA where my case manager, who was wonderful, would come out and make sure that I was, alive, okay, I guess, and still sort of living. But I really wasn't provided any resources or anything that could help me. And so it kept getting worse and worse. I punched holes through walls, through doors, yelling and screaming, trying to run out of the house, um, just horrible, horrible things. And finally, I got to the point where I couldn't even check the mail on my front porch. I was so afraid. And that led me to want to end my life. And so I attempted, and it didn't work. I mixed chemicals in my truck and it didn't work out and ended up doing a lot of damage to my throat, a lot of damage to my sinuses I still deal with. But I had to make a choice at that time that either I was going to give up and try again, or I was going to choose to live. And I chose at that point that I wanted to live. With that, I started to recognize that I needed to like have something to do. I needed something to invest my time in and to do something. Now I recognize that as purpose. Back then, I didn't really recognize what that was. I just knew I had to do something. So I started to volunteer. I found this organization that was brand new, providing psychiatric service dogs to veterans, combat veterans, and I started to volunteer with them, and it gave me purpose. I would wake up in the morning and I would have veterans that needed help, and they would have a question that I could help with. And I started to recognize that I had this reason for waking up in the morning. And with that, I started to explore different therapies. With that involvement in that nonprofit, I also started to realize, wow, there's a lot of other nonprofits that are out here doing work as well. I would go to these resource events and just be blown away with how many tables there were. I started to go through speech therapy, cognitive therapy, exposure therapy. I got a psychiatric service dog. I tried to do everything I could to sort of take advantage of the programs and services that existed around me, and that was 2012. Now, 12 years later, I can speak fairly well, and now, my purpose has grown. I wake up every day with a gusto to live and a desire to live, and I'm focusing on years down the road now where I couldn't even look 2 days in advance. And so I've been given power back to me, and through my recovery of all of these sort of programs and services that I've taken and therapies that I've taken advantage of, I've recognized that these services and programs don't necessarily exist in other parts of the country. I have a veteran friend who lives in Idaho, the other I, and he drives like 2.5 hours, 3 hours to the VA, and then his appointment is 2.5 hours, 3 hours, and then by the time he has to wait for his medication afterwards at the pharmacy, and then by the time he gets back, it's an entire day or more. Let alone if he has to have an MRI or procedure where he's going to have to stay even overnight. And I was just blown away by that. And so I started to really explore how we could really start providing programs and services like the ones that was receiving, to a more broad audience. And that's when I got involved with the San Diego Veterans Coalition. And they had been around since 2009, and were a nonprofit, and were essentially the glue that was holding 150 plus nonprofits together and ensuring that they were communicating and collaborating together, to better serve veterans in San Diego County. And the first meeting I went to, I sat there and watched the director of the VA at one of the meetings chat and just make himself completely available to the members of SDVC, and I saw it as this great opportunity to be a voice. And so I started to volunteer more and more, and kept knocking on the door. Hey, I want to do more, and they let me in. And now, I've worked my way up to second vice president. But in that process, um, I received a tremendous amount of mentorship. And that's something that I don't think we talk about often in sort of nonprofit volunteering and having purpose with programs and services out in the world that do work for veterans. That oftentimes when you volunteer for these groups, that you not only get your cup filled, but you also are able to really make a difference in your own life as well. And so I started to volunteer. I got off track. I apologize. So I started to volunteer with SDVC. They brought me on, and that led to other opportunities. I went to do a speaking event at a American Legion post. Didn't even know what the American Legion was, and realized that the American Legion post I was talking to was having major financial issues and administrative issues. And they asked me to help them. And so I came on as a Legionnaire, and then became the post commander. And now, as you mentioned, Rachel, I'm the nominee for district commander for District 22, and that is just elections happening in just a couple days. In my sort of life living with mental illness, I've realized that you need special care when you're working in a more executive level role. What I mean is that there's an expectation for you to conduct yourself in the way that is appropriate for that sort of setting. And sometimes we as veterans tend to, and especially those like myself who struggle with mental illness, sometimes we tend to be fairly intense. And we can be abrasive, and we can be somewhat argumentative. And none of those qualities are valuable when you're at a meeting where you're trying to figure out how best to serve a veteran. And so I've really have had to curb all of those sorts of behaviors and comments and so forth, and learn how to allow conflict to happen while also allowing myself not to be involved, and allowing myself to be hopefully a resolution source for those conflicts. And so building those bridges to build relationships versus burning bridges and causing conflict. And so it's just been amazing for me. And in doing so, it's opened up a tremendous amount of opportunities. And so, it's one of the things I really wanted to touch on, was that as veterans, we sort of inherently have been hardwired to believe that service above self is everything. And thank God they did that to us, because now we are caring for our own. And that's so crucial. Being a peer-to-peer support is just as important as having somebody with a clinical background be of support to a veteran. So, please, if you're a veteran out there, you're sort of in this lost world of, hey, what am I doing today? I don't know. I might just go walk the dog. Might just go take a little hike. Consider something maybe with a little bit more meaningfulness to it. Consider something where maybe you can use your sort of experiences to impact the lives of others around you. And that's what I've hoped to do. I talk about my mental illness very openly. And when I talk about it, I talk about a lot of the struggles that I had with my family, a lot of the reintegration challenges that I had with community, and then even with myself. And I was very aware of what, mental health, mental illness was, and how it was treated in the 80s and 90s, because my mom actually received mental health treatment in the 80s. And so I saw sort of the state hospital model, and how scary that was. And for those who are not familiar, I encourage you to look at state mental hospitals and how they were run and the issues that they had, and some of the images of of folks just rocking back and forth in a corner, over medicated and underserved. Just a true tragedy of our times. And as all those mental health hospitals closed, and the sort of weight of responsibility was put on the community didn't have the resources to address the mental health concerns of the folks in their community, but also didn't have a place to treat them. And so it was when we really started to see this massive influx in homelessness, in those with mental illness, not conforming to society in the sense that they are choosing to live on the street versus being housed. In most cases, that's because of a lack of treatment, because they're not even aware that they're ill. So, with all that in mind, I have sort of been afraid of mental health treatment. And mental health treatment has sort of been this scary word for me. And I recently have accepted a position at a mental health treatment center. It's amazing to think that I never thought I would be the one who would take on a role like this, because with that fear, I kind of wanted to stay as far away as I could from it. But I found this program, Solara Mental Health in San Diego, and they not only take the clinical approach to mental health treatment, but they also incorporate alternative therapies. And that was something that really attracted me to them. Everything from aquatic PTSD therapy, to equine therapy, to canine therapy, art therapy, biofeedback, breath work, yoga, meditation. I mean, it's just on and on, of all of these amazing sort of therapies, alternative therapies that exist to the patients at Solara. But Solara doesn't necessarily provide all those treatments in house. For example, with aquatic PTSD treatment therapy, they don't have a pool at their facility. So they are in collaboration and coordination with Healing Wave Aquatics, who is another nonprofit here in San Diego who provides aquatic therapy. And so through all of these connections and collaborations through the community, they've been able to better care and create a better whole health wellness program for veterans. So it's very unique. The thing that I worry about, and I have worried about for quite some time, is those who are like me, who suffer from mental illness, who are in remote areas in the United States where they may not have access to treatment facilities. They may not have access to care for mental health. And, PTSD, substance abuse, a major depressive disorder, panic disorder, severe anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder. All of those are things that need special treatment. You can't just go to a primary care physician and say, I have these disorders or these conditions, and they're not going to know how necessarily to treat them other than to give you medication. So the idea that something like Solara Mental Health exists, where you have all of these programs and all of these resources in one place, is unbelievable. So um, the idea is we can reach veterans from all over the country. And this isn't the idea. This is what's happening now, I should say. We're reaching veterans all over the country and bringing them to San Diego. They're living in a beautiful facility blocks from the beach in Pacific Beach, a part of San Diego here. They are being exposed to all different types of alternative therapies that they may not even know exist, as well as clinical therapies. And that is something that, they can stay from 30 to 100 days, depending on how the VA approves them. And it's all VA, community care provided. So it's not any out of pocket for the veteran. The community care program and the Compact Act is made so that veterans in Iowa who need this program and need this resource, or wherever they are, we have a veteran right now from Montana, can have these resources. That they don't need to have the treatment center in Iowa or Montana. You come here. We have a really amazing aftercare reintegration plan for veterans when they go back to their community. We have family therapists who help, with the reintegration after the veteran is coming out of therapy. We have marriage family therapists, or marriage therapists, family therapists, and then individual therapists who are all able to guide this person on their journey outside of their treatment. So one other really unique thing about the program is it's one of the very only that you can bring your pet or service dog to. Many of the treatment facilities do not allow this, and we've seen this as being a major hurdle for people. They have a dog that they've bonded with over the last years, and that is their care. And we need to recognize that when they go back home, they're going to have that care with them. So we want to make sure that they bring that dog out, that pet out, whatever it is. We will work to use that animal as part of their therapy to help them when they get back, so they can use that dog as a tool. And then, it has the highest success rating of any mental health facility that's comparable. So, that's really the reason that I came on board was, I met with the owner and the executive director, and they were just amazing. And they said, Vic, we don't really know what to do. We have a 7 day a week chef who's making amazing meals. We have this amazing facility. We have 28 beds, so it's small enough that we can, really have a community setting. There, we only serve veterans, but we only have 16 beds out of 28 filled, and we don't know why. Here we have this amazing service, and I truly believe it's because the veterans don't even know that something like this exists. And it doesn't have to exist in every community. And that's the great thing about it. So, I really hope that people, whether it's Solara Mental Health or it's somewhere else, they're looking at resources that are not only in their community, but are external resources that may serve their community. And with Solara, it's hard. It's hard because it's not something where you look up mental health treatment in Nebraska and, Solara is going to show up. But Solara does serve Nebraska and does want to have the veterans who live in Nebraska come and know that they have a place to come. And it's going to be free, and they're going to receive comprehensive care. So I just feel really excited about that. It's added to my purpose in a way that now when I'm on the phone with these veterans who are struggling in areas where I can't pick up the phone and say, hey, George, I've got a veteran who's struggling. Here's his name and number. He's waiting for you to call him. I don't have that in every part of the country. But now if I'm talking to those veterans, I do have a resource that I can provide to them. And I should also mention, this is something I'm not sure I should necessarily put on the record, but Solara has a policy that if you come to Solara and you are being treated and the VA denies your request, they will still serve and treat you for 30 days no matter what. So you will receive 30 days of care and treatment no matter what, even if the VA doesn't pay for it, because they have a scholarship program that they have in place to allow for that to happen. So I think that is a testament to their commitment to veterans and serving veterans. It's just unreal. I was last Wednesday at a clinical meeting, Rachel. This is a meeting that they have every Wednesday, and all of the clinicians and therapists all come into one room. And I was sitting in the back as a fly on the wall, just sort of trying to learn the culture and learn what they, all the services they do. It's comprehensive. And I'm sitting there, and the Reiki therapist shared that one of the patients was having issues with disengaging when in conversations, and that she noticed that when they start to look down and clench their hands, that they're actually completely disengaged and not present. And so when she was sharing this, the art therapist said, when we do art therapy on tomorrow, I'm going to have him start working on this exercise that's going to help him to stay engaged. And then the dog therapist, a canine therapist said, when we're doing dog therapy, we can do it where every 2 seconds we're having him engage with the dog to keep that engagement. Then the biofeedback, he's got something to say. The clinical therapist says we can do this on the clinical side. Rachel, I had tears coming down my eyes because here are 20 some people, maybe even close to 25, all sitting around figuring out how best to care for one veteran at a time. This is what this one veteran needs. This is what this one veteran's challenge is. And how can we all come together around him to support him in that challenge? If I had that when I got out with my mental health struggles, I would have not tried to end my life. I believe that. I sat next to a guy in the clinic who I didn't realize was a past patient, a past client. And I was sitting there and he's sitting next to me and chatting it up and chatting it up. We're talking about what an awesome day it is. And he looks over at me and says, you know, this place saved my life. And I said, excuse me. And he said, I came in here on death's bed, addicted and mentally checked out. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, served in combat, did like 12 different deployments, da 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 da. And I was ready to, check out. And now I'm just stopped by here today to drop off this stuff. And I'm going to hang out with my son and take him to soccer practice. I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's telling me about how this program saved his life. And so I just can't say enough good stuff about it. I'm so honored and excited to be a part of the team and the program. And then really just to be able to give veterans hope, you know, let veterans know there's hope. There's people out here who have amazing techniques and therapies that are helping. And I think this is an example of what mental health can look like in the United States.
Do they cover airfare, Vic, for anyone that's
They
out of
do.
state?
They do. So out of and they cover everything: transportation, food, the whole deal, everything from the time that you say I want to go until the time that you're done.
Wow.
So and the dog stuff is great. I mean, the pet thing has just been such a cool element, I think, to the community. Because even those who don't have dogs are now interacting with these dogs who are being trained to give this level of support and level of security, not security in a form of protection, but a security in form of emotional security. And so they're getting advantages of it as well. We have 6 dogs currently at the facility, and it's just unreal. It's amazing and beautiful.
That's incredible. Yeah, I think the biggest hurdle mentally when it comes to thinking about these inpatient programs or extensive, 30 to 100-day programs is usually, well, how am I going to pay for it? And then even if I can pay for the program, how do I pay to get there? And a lot of times, I know there's even times in my journey where I've thought, man, it'd be really helpful to have something that was just getting me out of my environment and just helping me focus on healing. But all these challenges automatically stack up, right? Like money, how to get there, is the wait list super long? And so it's really cool to know that there is something that's out there that not only is a good program, because again, not all programs are created equal, not all nonprofits, not all facilities are created equal, but to know that they have broken down that major barrier that exists in the minds of a lot of veterans who want help but don't know how to get there. So I'm so appreciative that you shared that. You, I guess, kind of glossed over from 2012 to now in your journey. And my question that I had for you that really stuck out in my mind was from 2012 to 2024, you obviously did a lot of work. Can you talk a little bit about the roller coaster of that journey? Or, because when we just hear like, okay, and then I did this program and I did all these things from this time to this time, it's hard to really quantify in the brain, like, how hard it is to actually come out of a really, really deep, dark place and pull ourselves up to where you are now. Like that takes a lot of work. And so if you could touch on that so that everyone listening just has a better understanding of how that was for you.
Absolutely. And I think I do that because it is a very hard time. That
Yeah.
was a very, very difficult time. And it was a lot of growth, but it's a lot of challenges and a lot of feeling uncomfortable and a lot of feeling sort of, am I doing the right thing? Is it, it's a lot of questioning yourself. But I started to recognize when I left the first organization that I was working with, I took a lot of positives from that experience, and um, a lot of things that I recognized that I never wanted to do again, and that I wanted to fix that I wasn't able to fix there. And so my focus became on more of a systemic issues. I saw with the organization that was providing psychiatric service dogs that the line for services was never getting shorter; it was only getting longer, and and I felt as though we were putting a band-aid on a gouging wound that was never going to be fixed unless systemic issues were fixed way upstream. And so when I left there, I shifted my focus from providing specific program and services at a peer-to-peer level and started to focus on systemic issues where I could make change at a higher level. And so my involvement with the San Diego Veterans Coalition allowed me to participate in a lot of discussions, informal committees, informal councils that sort of developed into opportunities. One of my mentors always says, you win the war with who shows up. And oftentimes, our generation and a lot of what we talk about in the American Legion and struggles there are that nobody shows up. You know, the we have this program which is great, but nobody shows up to do the program. Or, we have this great service to offer, but nobody shows up to share about the service. And so we see that even with nonprofits that have tables at resource fairs and they're struggling to find somebody to staff that table. Oftentimes, the person staffing the table isn't even really knowledgeable about the program because they're a lower level volunteer. They can't find people to really to volunteer at that level, at a level where they would have the level of knowledge that would make a difference in them sharing their messaging. So I started to align myself with figuring out how to get involved with active duty service members to be able to share messaging. And I ran into, or not ran into, but one of my colleagues at the San Diego Veterans Coalition, Maurice Wilson, who I visited Oak Harbor with, he had been focusing on employment opportunities for veterans and sort of this rebooting your life through a seminar that he had created that is just phenomenal, called Reboot, and kind of a reverse boot camp. And so his goal was to try to provide what he was offering to active duty service members. And both of us were trying to, as SDVC, to build a relationship with the military so that we would be able to share information from the 150 different organizations instead of the military having to have 150 different organizations come on base. And so that was a lot of work. And I should mention that during this time, on a mental health front, you're never cured from mental illness. I don't believe that. I've never found one thing that's been the cure all. I found things that have certainly helped, and tools and therapies and treatments that have helped, ongoing things that help, tricks and tools that help, but it still exists. And that's important to note. If the goal is to be cured from mental illness, then you're never going to achieve your goal. If your goal is to be able to master mental illness and be able to use it to your advantage, well, then that can absolutely be achieved. I tend to be a little bit manic and suffer from panic disorder. I've learned to use that in my work, and I've learned to use that as part of the drive and effort into my focus of work. But if I didn't, it would become destructive. And so I really believe that a lot of the things that were dealt can be used in an advantageous way, even if it is just to build empathy. And I say that because sometimes when I am anxious, I have a plethora of tools that I can use. I have built a toolbox that is so just unbelievably advanced when it comes to bringing myself down from an anxiety attack. Excuse me. However, when it comes to depression, I don't have the will to use any tools. And so when I get depressed, I have to figure out the positive from depression. And the positive is that I'm learning empathy. learning what it's like to be depressed so that when I'm working with someone who's depressed, I can certainly and truly understand the feelings that they're having. And, I can use it to my advantage because I know that the pendulum has to swing the other direction. When I'm depressed, I always know, hey, better days are coming. Can't stay like this forever. You just got to wait it out, and use what I can. But I think the biggest thing that we can do when we're depressed is leaning on other people. And that's what helped me over this last 12 years, leaning on other people. I still have issues. I still struggle. I still can't take showers without having my dog in in the bathroom closed, with my wife on watch out in the, making sure nobody's coming in the house. I still have struggles. Still, sometimes when I show up to locations to have a meeting, I have to circle the parking lot 2 or 3 times to get myself acclimated, or at least aware of the surroundings so that I feel comfortable in the meeting. I recognize those things. I don't fight them. I don't let them upset me. I let them just be part of who I am and try to learn from them. So, yes, the 12-year journey has been an up and down journey with a lot of struggles, a lot of continued therapies. There's a place in my mind for a little bit of everything, and medication has its place, but medication, a service dog, whatever it may be, it just cannot be by itself. It has to be collaborative.
I love that you touched on it's not that we're trying to be cured. I think that the military can create such a black and white mentality, right? Like what, right? Well, now you're ill, now you're not ill, and now we move on to the next thing. And I started to recognize that even with myself in so many areas of life is that I was thinking so black and white. I'm like, well, it has to be either one way or the other. I couldn't exist in this world where, maybe mental illness is still there, but I learned to use it in a way that worked to my advantage and just learned to lean into the things that make up me as a person and aren't necessarily negative things, but they're things that exist. And we just learn to work with them. And so I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that there are a lot of people out there that are probably similar to me that feel like it's like having a broken leg, which even that example, you could even say once you break your leg's never going to be the same again. It's not like your leg is completely 100% cured and better. I mean, there's always going to be some evidence there of that break. It's a little less strong than it was before. And we can't see that. So it's hard for us to, really make that comparison. But to give that physical example, like, yeah, once we are hurt in any way, physical, mental, emotional, we don't go back to this healed whole version, or it's not that, all of a sudden we're healed and then everything's better again. We always have to somehow adjust in some way, shape, or form.
You're 100% correct, Rachel. I kind of reflect back on something that my, at the time, 10-year-old daughter told me. And this was in the sort of the midst of my crisis. And she had a piece of paper in her hand. It was a blank piece of paper. She walked up and she said, "Dad, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Sure." We sat on the couch and she said, "Sometimes, Dad, when you say mean things to me or harsh things to me, it makes me want to crumble up into a ball." And she slowly started to crumble this piece of paper up into a ball. And she went on to explain that words can hurt and they stick with you. And by this time, the ball was very tightly wrapped in her hands. And then she said, "But then when you come and you apologize and you tell me that you love me," and she starts to open up the paper and starts to smooth it out. And she says, "Dad, when after you tell me that you love me and after you tell me that you're sorry and you give me a hug and kiss, the paper is smoothed out, but there's still all these wrinkles in the paper and they don't go away." Whew. It stuck with me. It really did. It's something that, we don't talk about enough as far as um, the pain that words can bring, um, but also the joy that words can bring. I've really tried to encourage my family, just do something kind, be at the coffee shop and tell someone that their hair looks nice, or they have a nice jacket or something, something that just is a kind thing, a compliment, something to recognize that someone exists. I remember on my darkest days, I would take my daughter to school, and on the way home, there was this old man who would walk. And every morning I would see him, and every morning he would wave at every single car that drove by when he was on his walk, every single time. And I would wave back every single morning. But then one morning he wasn't there, and I started to feel depressed. I started to feel like, man, I didn't have that wave this morning. I didn't realize what a smile and little bit of filling my cup that was that I needed. And so you don't realize just what a wave can do, or a smile, or something kind. And so I just really encourage people to spread that kindness, because it will fill your own cup. It's not, it is a karma thing. It totally is. If you give good to the world, good will be given to you. I truly believe that.
Absolutely. It's funny. There was an individual in my community when I was growing up. We always called him Smiley. He was a man that would also always be out waving and always had the biggest smile on his face. And man, I feel like there's one in every community, right? Like, because even here, when I moved to Whidbey Island, there's an individual who used to walk up and down my street, an elderly gentleman, and he would always smile and wave. And I hope that those people still exist in the world. I'm sure they do. But that individual, Smiley, I never really fully knew what his name was, but I was, God, maybe 10 years old at the time that happened. And I still remember
Still
it.
remember? Yeah, you
I'm
still remember.
31 now, and so when you're absolutely correct when you talk about the impact it makes on someone's life, waving at someone, the one of the simplest things you can do, smiling and waving at someone, but consistently doing it and not caring about what other people might think, because I'm sure that there are people that looked down at that man and were like, well, he's crazy, but it made an impact decades later. And so it's really cool. I'm glad you brought that up because it brought up a really awesome memory for me. Vic, I wanted to talk a little bit about the San Diego Veterans Coalition, because you do talk about the collective impact model and organizations collaborating and working together. And I know SDVC does this. And I know a lot of people down in San Diego that are not aware of SDVC and what the organization does. So I wanted to give you a platform to just talk about that for a little bit.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, Rachel. And this is really, close to my heart. I just believe so much in the work that we're doing at SDVC. The San Diego Veterans Coalition, as I mentioned, is a 501c3. We've been around since about 2009. It was founded by a gentleman named Gary Rossio, who was the former director of the VA healthcare system here in San Diego. And it really was meant to bring the community together. Here in San Diego, we have too many nonprofits serving veterans. We have over 400, and we call that the Sea of Goodwill. And one of the reasons that it is, impactful, or one of the things that we say is that you can drown in that sea of goodwill as well. It's that vast. Trying to navigate a sea with 400 different organizations is very difficult to do. It's difficult to understand what organization does what. So the San Diego Veterans Coalition works to bring all those groups and organizations together, including the government, including educational facilities, for-profit entities, to come together, sit down, and be able to collaborate together on a specific issue. So we have 4 different action groups within the San Diego Veterans Coalition, all focused on a different element of the veteran experience. So we have E3 plus T, which is education, employment, entrepreneurship plus transition. That action group really just focuses on those elements of the veteran experience. Those veterans who want to get into business, or looking for a job, are looking at transitioning and don't sort of know what's next. That's the action group for you. We also have VEST, which is Veterans Empowered, Successful, and Thriving. That action group is sort of different. It focuses on all those veterans in our community who are doing amazing work, who are models for what veterans can be and should be and could be if they so choose. They are veterans in our community who are making a huge difference, and are impactful in their work. So one of my favorites action groups, and I always have my cup filled when I'm done with that group. And then we also have the Family Life Action Group FLAG, which focuses obviously on the family, caregivers, providing support to them and resources to them. And each one of the organizations at SDVC all find their way into what action group works best for them and participate. And some might participate in one or more of those action groups. And then we have, lastly, the Physical and Emotional Health Action Group, which is the action group that I chair. And it is essentially focused on those physical therapies, physical health, alternative health therapies that exist for veterans in our community. And so we have quite a few organizations like vetart.org, also the Cohen Clinic, VVSD, which is Veterans Village of San Diego. Here in San Diego, we have several different organizations that participate, and they all sort of serve different different purposes. And I think that's the really important thing to focus on about SDVC is SDVC has recognized that not one organization can provide every service to a veteran. It really does need to involve others, and collectively it can make a greater impact. And so I use the dog therapy or dog service dog. I'm going to think of how best to word that. I guess it would be therapy dog programs. We have 5 of them who are members of the San Diego Veterans Coalition. And one of the reasons is that they all focus on a different element. One organization provides emotional support animals and therapy dogs. One organization focuses on mobility service dogs, another on MST and PTSD service dogs, and another on, whatever the case may be. And so it's a wide range. Not all those organizations do the same thing. So we wouldn't be serving veterans appropriately or accurately if we only had one of those organizations participate. And so same thing with mental health. Solara Mental Health obviously is a member of the San Diego Veterans Coalition, but we also have others. And in fact, many of the mental health organizations within SDVC are now collaborating together to better figure out how to educate providers on the Compact Act, because we're finding that a lot of providers aren't familiar on how to use the portal, the Compact portal, and aren't familiar on how to actually refer community referrals. So community care referrals. So that's part of what that focus is. So SDVC is sort of this backbone organization that works very closely with the San Diego County government. We also have many other coalitions that are members, including the San Diego Military Advisory Council, San Diego Family Military Collaborative, Veterans East County Alliance, and several others who all are members of the SDVC. And so we really believe in working together and collaborating, and that we can do more together.
And so if an individual got a hold of someone at SDVC, they would just get in. I'm assuming there's some kind of intake process for someone that needed services. Because I can imagine from the standpoint of someone that needs help, it can feel quite overwhelming to find a place that says, oh, we have over 400 organizations. So what's the process for someone that actually needs help or services and would come to SDVC for that?
Absolutely. So what we like to do is we use best practices. So we've identified at SDVC, because we don't technically provide programs and services, our focus is on that collaborative effort, keeping organizations communicating, keeping organizations working together, etc. Because of that, we have to rely on the best practices of our membership. And so we have a member, Courage to Call, which has been a monumentous nonprofit here in San Diego, providing everything from food markets for those experiencing food insecurities to providing legal resources or referrals. It is just unbelievable. They are the sort of point of contact that we want people to go into first, because they're going to be able to guide them to the other SDVC members that are out there and provide those specific services. But we work very, very closely with Courage to Call. In fact, one of their outreach coordinators is one of our board of directors. And so we work to ensure that we have this clear line of communication with Courage to Call to ensure that they can both handle the load in what we're providing, but also in special case needs where somebody reaches out to SDVC in crisis or in need, not necessarily just looking for a referral. We're able to do a warm handoff to Courage to Call and ensure that that is followed through with, which Courage to Call is amazing
That's
doing.
awesome. That's awesome. So I know there's a lot that you're doing, Vic. Was there any other organizations or things that you're working on that you really felt compelled to highlight in this episode today, other than what you already said?
Yeah, one. And this is more of just a FYSA for everybody, all the veterans out there who are receiving mental health care at their VA. About 6 months ago, I discovered that here in San Diego, we have something called the Mental Health Advocacy Council, and it's a council of the VA healthcare system here in San Diego. So it's actually a component of the VA. The council is made up of what they consider consumers, which are the veterans who are receiving mental health treatment at the VA, at any of the clinics here in San Diego in the healthcare system. The interesting thing that I found out is that it's been around for 20 years. And it is really supposed to be the voice for those veterans in the in the community who are receiving mental health care to be able to express concerns, areas of improvement, deficiency, etc., that they can bring to leadership of the VA. The councils have a VA representative liaison that is assigned to the council so that there is VA representation in council meetings at each of the council meetings. So my concern is I just recently went on a national call where all of the mental health advocacy councils from across the nation, because I found out that each healthcare VA healthcare system is supposed to have one of these, that on the national call, there were only about 16 or 17 of us. And that made me feel as though a lot of folks might not know that this council exists at their VA healthcare system. So, and the VA may not know either, because if the council ended 6 years ago and has never been reinstated, they may have no idea that that council existed. However, we can get it started up again. And so I'm willing to help any veterans who are interested in getting involved in a council through their VA. If they need any resources, if they're looking at setting up a council through the VA, or if a VA coordinator would like to find out more information about how to set up a council, I do have the bylaws available that would be easily replicable. And we could get started with helping them to get established. I think this is a really important council that exists that isn't necessarily being taken advantage of. Again, it's not an opportunity to bitch. It's an opportunity to find solutions to better mental health treatment at the VA. And if we don't participate, we can never improve it.
Right. What's the best way to get in contact with you for that, Vic?
So I would say probably my email is best, and that is M as in Mary, N as in Nancy, dot Vic Martin, VICMARTIN @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure to post your contact info as well as links to all the resources you mentioned. Solara Mental Health Treatment, the San Diego Veterans Coalition, that'll all be in the show notes. So if you're listening to this and anything really stuck out to you as something that you might want to take advantage of, or maybe even explore a little more, feel free to check out the show notes for those resources. They will be there. And then also feel free to reach out to Vic if you just felt that something resonated, or if you have questions or just want to chat about something that maybe was really on your heart. Vic's an awesome person to talk to, and I'm sure he would welcome that conversation. So, Vic, I am so grateful that you just took the time to share a little bit of your story. I know there's so much that we could get into and we could chat for hours. You've just done some incredible things in your journey so far, a lot that I don't even know about yet. And so I just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart and express my gratitude for you being here. And if there are any last words or pieces of advice that you want to leave the listeners with, you are welcome to share those now.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I so appreciate the opportunity to be here and for all that you do for our veterans and for the military who are looking at transitioning and getting out. And this really helps them to understand what's on the other side of the gate. I think if I had to leave one comment behind or one statement behind, it would be find your purpose. I think finding your purpose is probably one of the most crucial things that you can do for your mental health. If you don't have a purpose and you're living in this gray area, your body will not find a reason to live. It will only find negative things that will encourage you to not live. But if you find purpose, you will be encouraged to help others and motivate yourself to help others. It's like a snowball effect. You just keep, you keep recognizing, oh, I can help this person if I do this, and oh, I can help this person if I do that. So it's all relative to your purpose. I highly encourage people, whatever it is, if it's sewing, if it's, crossing, being a crossing guard, whatever it may be, find your purpose, help somebody.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today, with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.